They called him defective surplus, a discard from a life of shadowed service. But as you touched the wire cage, you felt the shared pulse of a warrior and a dark mission that was coming for you both. Elias Thorn doesn't wake up to an alarm. He wakes up to a clock he can't turn off. At precisely 4:30, his eyes snap open in the pre-dawn gray of the Montana wilderness. There is no fumbling, only the immediate, sharp awareness of a man who spent 2 decades in the shadows. Discipline isn't a choice for Elias. It's a survival mechanism, a ghost of the Navy SEAL teams that still patrols the hallways of his mind. He moves through the cedar-planked cabin with a silent, measured efficiency. First, the perimeter scan. He moves the heavy wool curtain just an inch, eyes tracking the tree line for anything that doesn't belong, a broken branch or a misplaced shadow. Satisfied, he moves to the kitchen. The ritual is always the same. He splashes ice-cold water on his face, the shock grounding him in a reality that often feels too quiet. The kettle whistles, a sharp, piercing sound that mimics a distant signal, but Elias doesn't flinch. He pours the water over black coffee grounds, the steam rising to meet the scars on his knuckles, reminders of a life spent in the dirt and the dark. While the coffee steeps, he sits at a heavy oak table under the warm glow of a single lamp. He opens a well-worn Bible, his finger tracing the ink of Psalm 34:18. The Lord is close to the broken-hearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. He doesn't read it for comfort. He reads it for orders. To Elias, faith isn't a feeling, it's a mission profile. After the reading, he checks his gear. A tactical belt, a folding blade, and a worn military radio tuned to a frequency that hasn't broadcast a friendly voice in years. This is his normal life of calculated isolation, kept in check by the echoes of fallen brothers and a relentless drive to stay sharp. He laces his boots with a tension that speaks of impending movement. But as he reaches for his truck keys, he pauses at a small, locked steel box on the mantel. He doesn't open it. He just touches the cold metal, his expression hardening into a mask of granite. Inside that box sits a single unaddressed envelope and a name he hasn't crossed out yet, a debt of honor that refuses to stay buried. The morning air is a cold slap as he steps out onto the porch. The world is waking up, but something feels off. The wind carries a scent he hasn't smelled since the outskirts of Kabul, the metallic tang of stressed iron and the musk of fear. He knows where he's going. He is headed to the surpluses auction at the old fairgrounds, a place where they sell the remnants of lives that no longer have a purpose. He tells himself he's just looking for equipment, but his pulse tells a different story. As the engine rumbles to life, he doesn't know he's about to find a mirror made of scars and a warrior's soul. The drive is long, and the feeling of a brewing storm tightens its grip on his chest. The gavel strikes the wooden podium with a sharp, dry crack that sends a jolt through Elias's spine, echoing like a sniper's round in an alleyway. The noise shatters the morning hush of the fairgrounds, killing the low drone of the crowd. Elias stands at the perimeter, his hands deep in the pockets of his waxed canvas jacket, his eyes instinctively scanning the exits. He isn't here for rusted tractors or industrial fasteners. He is here because the air feels heavy with a familiar, suffocating tension. The auctioneer, an oily man with a voice like sandpaper, points a finger at a rusted wire crate pushed into the shadows of the loading dock. "Lot 402, he shouts, his voice devoid of any human warmth. Government-issued biological surplus, untrainable, non-responsive, high risk. As the crate is wheeled into the harsh, flickering light of the pavilion, Elias feels a cold knot tighten in his chest. Inside isn't equipment, it's a living soul. A German shepherd, his coat matted with the dust of a dozen transit camps, huddles at the back of the cage. The dog doesn't bark, he doesn't growl. He simply watches the crowd with eyes that have seen the end of the world. Elias recognizes that look immediately. It's the 1,000-yard stare he sees in his own mirror every morning at 4:30. This dog isn't defective. He's a veteran whose war never ended. The shepherd's ears are pinned back, and his ribs are visible through the fur, heaving with a rhythmic, controlled breathing that Elias knows too well. It's the breath of a soldier holding his position under heavy fire. Elias moves through the crowd, his boots thudding heavily on the packed earth. He ignores the sidelong glances of the local farmers. He reaches the cage and stops. His heart hammers against his ribs as he spots the faded purple tattoo inside the dog's left ear. K909. The breath hitches in his throat. That is the number written on the unaddressed envelope sitting in the steel box back at his cabin. This is Bear, the partner of the man Elias couldn't save 3 years ago. The debt of honor he's been carrying like a stone in his pocket suddenly has a face, and it's covered in scars. Starting bid, $500 for scrap, the auctioneer bellows, his eyes already looking past the cage. To the world, this is a dangerous liability. To Elias, this is a brother-in-arms left behind on the battlefield. A man in a dark SUV watches from the edge, a satellite phone pressed to his ear. The mission Elias thought was buried is suddenly alive and breathing behind cold steel. He raises his hand, his voice like granite hitting marble. 5,000. The crowd goes silent. Elias looks into the dog's eyes and sees the fire ignite within them both. The quiet life in the woods is gone. He hasn't just bought a dog. He has reopened a war, and there is no turning back. The rain doesn't just fall in the Montana high country. It attacks, a relentless drumming on the cedar shingles that sounds like the rhythmic thud of a long-ago rotor blade. Inside the cabin, the air is thick with the scent of wet fur and the metallic tang of old blood. Elias sits on the floor, the heavy oak table casting a long, jagged shadow over the room. Bear is huddled in the corner, his body rigid, a low, guttural whine vibrating through his chest, a sound Elias recognizes as the precursor to a total psychological collapse. The dog's eyes are wide, reflecting the lightning that strobes through the half-drawn curtains, and every crack of thunder sends him into a violent, rhythmic shiver. Elias reaches out, his hand open and steady, but Bear snaps, teeth clicking just inches from his scarred knuckles. The rejection is a physical blow, sharper than any shrapnel. It's the silence that follows the snap that hurts the most. Elias pulls his hand back, his fingers trembling a tremor he hasn't seen since a dusty rooftop in Ramadi. He looks at the steel box on the mantel, now open, its contents exposed like a raw nerve. The unaddressed envelope lies on the table, its edges yellowed and brittle. He had promised Caleb he would bring Bear home, find him a piece that soldiers rarely get to keep. But as he looks at the shattered, terrified creature in the corner, he realizes he hasn't brought home a partner. He's brought home a haunting. The weight of his failure feels like a lead vest he can't strip off. He was trained to fix everything, to secure the perimeter, to leave no man behind. But here he is, staring at a broken legacy he doesn't know how to mend. He turns to the well-worn Bible, the pages fluttering in the cold draft seeping through the floorboards. He wants to read about mercy, but his eyes can only find the darkness of the valley. "Why this, Lord?" he whispers, his voice cracking, a sound rarely heard by anything but the mountain winds. He thinks of the 50 years of miles on his soul the brothers lost, the quiet birthdays spent in stale barracks, the joints that ache now with every shift in the barometric pressure. For the first time, the rigid discipline of his life feels like a cage rather than a shield. He feels small, an old soldier playing house in the woods while the wolves circle closer. The men in the dark SUV are shadows of a past that won't let go, and he realizes his cabin is no longer a sanctuary, it's a kill zone. He is alone, outgunned by his own guilt and the men waiting in the trees. The darkness feels absolute as the power flickers once and then dies, plunging the room into a deep, suffocating charcoal. Bear stops whining and stands, his hackles rising, his head cocked toward the heavy timber door. In the pitch black, Elias reaches for his sidearm, but his hand freezes. He realizes his heart isn't in the fight anymore. The light has gone out in him as much as it has in the room. But then, something happened. The darkness isn't just an absence of light, it's a living thing, heavy as a wet wool blanket. Elias feels the checkered grip of his sidearm, its weight a hollow comfort. Out there, The Montana wind roars through the timber, but the real war is silent and internal. His breath comes in shallow, jagged hitches, mirroring the desperate, rhythmic panting of the dog in the dark corner. Bear is trapped in the same recurring nightmare. Elias realizes with a clarity sharper than any shrapnel that they are two sides of the same shattered coin. He isn't the savior. He's just a man who forgot that even the strongest tactical armor cannot protect a heart that has stopped hoping. He reaches into his jacket and pulls out a dented brass lighter. The flame flickers to life, a tiny, amber heartbeat against the vast charcoal of the room. Its light falls on Caleb's unaddressed envelope. There, hidden by a thumbprint, is a scrawled verse. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. The words seem to vibrate on the yellowed, brittle paper. Tucked behind it, a folded photograph shows Caleb and Bear in a rare moment of peace under a desert sun. On the back, in Caleb's frantic scrawl, "Elias, if you find him, remember he doesn't need another handler. He needs a brother who isn't afraid to be broken too. Just sit. Just breathe." Elias lets the pistol slide from his grip. It hits the floor with a dull, final thud that doesn't trigger a snarl. Instead, Elias sinks to his knees, his joints popping in the heavy quiet. The floorboards are cold, the wood grain pressing into his skin. He doesn't reach out. He doesn't issue a command. He surrenders his pride. "I'm sorry, Caleb," he whispers, his voice a raw tremor. "I'm sorry, Bear. I was trying to secure the perimeter. I forgot how to just be home." He begins to hum a low, wordless melody, the ghost of a soft hymn his mother sang years ago, about grace and finding rest. The air in the cabin shifts. The metallic tang of adrenaline evaporates, replaced by the scent of damp pine and wood smoke. Bear moves. The floorboards groan under the weight of the massive shepherd. Elias stays still, eyes closed, heart hammering. He feels a cold, wet nose press against his neck, followed by the warm weight of a head resting on his shoulder. A deep, shuddering sigh escapes the dog's lungs, a release of 3 years of held breath. The shivering stops. Outside, the storm rages against the shingles, but the storm inside the cabin has found its eye. Elias opens his eyes as a sliver of moonlight cuts through the window, reflecting in Bear's eyes. They aren't haunted anymore. They are clear and focused on him. A slow, rhythmic thumping starts Bear's tail hitting the wood. It is the heartbeat of a new mission. Elias reaches up, his fingers sinking into the thick fur behind the dog's ears. No more ghosts, no more cages. But as the peace settles, the unmistakable crunch of gravel echoes from the ridge below. The shadows are coming for them, and this time, Elias isn't fighting alone. Elias stands, but he doesn't reach for the handgun on the floor. Instead, he reaches for the heavy nylon harness draped over the back of the chair Bear's old tactical kit. His fingers, once stiff with defeat, now move with the fluid, muscle memory precision of a man who has found his purpose. He doesn't bark an order. He simply holds the harness open. Bear steps forward, his massive chest sliding into the straps with a familiar, metallic click. The sound is a declaration. They are no longer a broken man and a discarded dog. They are a unit. The silence outside isn't empty. It's professional. Elias knows the rhythm of a tactical approach. The crunch of gravel wasn't a mistake. It was a distraction. A team is likely moving through the timber on the north flank, using the wind to mask their scent. He feels the old fire in his gut, but it's tempered. He isn't looking for a way to die. He's looking for a way to survive. He pulls a suppressed submachine gun from the safe and checks the chamber by feel. He looks at Bear. The dog's ears are pinned back, eyes fixed on the door with lethal focus. Elias rests a hand on Bear's shoulder. Quietly, he breathes. No commands, just the whisper of a brother. Suddenly, a window disappears. A flash bang rolls across the hardwood, a blinding white sun in the charcoal room. The concussion hits Elias like a sledgehammer, sending him stumbling. His ears ring with an agonizing scream. This is the first obstacle. The sensory overload he once thrived in now triggers a violent spike in his blood pressure, his vision blurring. He is no longer 25. In the whiteout, a memory cuts through. Fallujah, 2014. Caleb is sitting in the dirt, teasing a younger, hyperactive bear. Control the chaos, Elias. Caleb's voice is clear, cutting through the ringing of the grenade. If you fight the noise, you lose. Don't listen to the explosions. Listen to the heartbeat next to you. That's the only rhythm that matters. The flashback snaps shut as a boot kicks the door off its hinges. Elias doesn't panic. He doesn't even look at the door. He trusts the shadow beside him. Bear is a blur, a silent predator launching himself through the smoke. There is a muffled shout and a heavy thud. Elias rolls, coming up in a crouch behind the oak table. He isn't the lumbering veteran anymore. He is the master of this kill zone. He fires 2 controlled bursts, suppressing the breach. He is moving differently now. His weight is centered. His breathing is a measured cycle. He isn't fighting a war. He is protecting his home. He glances at Bear, who is already circling back, eyes locked on the rear window. They move in a synchronized dance of shadows and steel. But as more beams of light cut through the driving rain, the sheer number of signatures becomes clear. This is a full squad. Elias feels the ache in his joints and the weight of the years pressing down. He has the dog. He has his soul. But as the first red laser dot dances across his chest, the question remains, will it be enough? The red laser dot on Elias's sternum is a burning ember, a tiny synthetic sun that dictates his mortality. Outside, the Montana rain has turned into a freezing deluge, the sound hammering against the cedar shingles like 1,000 frantic fingers trying to claw their way inside. Elias can hear the leader of the squad, now a voice he recognizes, cold and surgical. It's Miller. Miller, the man who once called Elias the most efficient scalpel in the unit's arsenal. Elias, don't be a fool. Miller's voice booms through a megaphone, the electronics crackling with the static of the storm. The dog is government property. He's an unstable asset, a liability with a failing circuit. Hand him over, walk out with your hands up, and we bury the paperwork. I can give you your life back, Elias. The clean slate, the pension, the silence you've been looking for, or you can die in the mud for a beast that's already half ghost. The temptation is a siren song, sweet and lethal. A clean slate. No more recurring nightmares of Fallujah's dust, no more hiding in the shadows of the timber. He can feel the weight of his years, the ache in his knees, and the exhaustion that has settled deep into his marrow. He looks down at Bear. The German shepherd is a statue of dark fur and focused intent, his body coiled like a high-tension spring. The old Elias, the man who existed before the cabin, before the letter, feels a cold, familiar calculation creeping into his fingers. He knows exactly where the fuel lines run under the floorboards. He could vent them, wait for the breach, and spark a flare. It would be a professional exit, a warrior's end that would take Miller and his squad with him into the dark. He could use Bear as the distraction, a sacrificial pawn to draw the first volley of fire. He could survive this by being the monster they trained him to be. The tension in the cabin reaches a screaming crescendo. The air is thick with the smell of ozone, wet wool, and the metallic tang of adrenaline. The laser dot crawls upward, settling on the hollow of Elias's throat. His finger trembles on the trigger of his weapon. One move, and the carnage begins. But then, he feels the warm pressure of Bear's flank against his leg. He remembers Caleb's words. A brother who isn't afraid to be broken too. Elias makes his choice. It isn't a tactical decision. It's an act of faith. He lowers the barrel of his weapon. With a slow, deliberate movement, his fingers reach for the quick-release buckles on Bear's tactical harness. One by one, they click open. He strips away the Kevlar and the heavy hardware until Bear is just a dog again. "Go, Bear," Elias whispers. "The crawl space. Run and don't look back. You're free." Elias stands up, stepping away from the cover of the oak table and into the center of the room, fully exposed to the scopes in the timber. He puts his weapon on the floor and raises his empty hands. He is no longer a soldier protecting an objective or a handler managing an asset. He is a man who has finally found something worth losing everything for. Courage, he realizes, finally walks on 2 legs and 4. The morning light in the Montana mountains doesn't cut through the windows like a tactical sweep anymore. It spills across the floorboards like liquid gold, warm and slow, illuminating a space that has finally stopped feeling like a bunker and started feeling like a home. 6 months have passed since the night the red lasers danced on the cedar walls. Elias sits on the porch, his fingers wrapped around a steaming ceramic mug, watching the mist retreat into the timber. For the first time in 2 decades, his shoulders have dropped. The hypervigilance, that jagged electric wire that used to hum in his veins, has finally gone quiet. The bullet holes in the front door have been patched with fresh pine, the scent of sap and sawdust replacing the metallic tang of gunpowder and ozone. Beside him, Bear isn't coiled for a breach. The massive German shepherd is sprawled across the sun-drenched planks, his paws occasionally twitching as he chases ghosts in his sleep. There is no tactical harness today. No Kevlar plates, no ballistic fiber, no heavy nylon straps biting into his shoulders. He wears a simple leather collar with a polished brass tag that jingles musically whenever he shifts. Miller and the retrieval team had eventually backed down that night. It proved impossible to justify recovering a loose asset when the handler stood unarmed in the center of the room, offering his own freedom to guarantee the safety of a creature the military had already labeled as scrap. The paperwork was eventually buried, the records scrubbed. The surplus soldier and the discarded dog were officially granted the silence they had earned. Elias reaches down, his fingers threading through the thick, coarse fur of Bear's neck. He finds the soft spot behind the ears that Caleb used to talk about in the dust of Fallujah, and Bear lets out a long, heavy sigh of absolute peace. This is the emotional payoff Elias never thought he would deserve. The realization that they aren't weapons waiting for the next trigger pull, but 2 companions who found their way out of the fog together. The frantic, jagged pulse he first felt through the cold wire of that rescue cage has smoothed into a steady, rhythmic cadence, a shared heartbeat that confirms they are no longer running. They aren't looking for a way to die honorably anymore. They are learning the much harder, more beautiful art of living well. As Elias watches a hawk circle high above the tree line, he understands that the mission didn't end with a firefight, it ended with a surrender to grace. He looks at the warrior at his feet and sees his own reflection, no longer broken, but finally whole. He realizes that while the world values the strength of the sword, the greatest strength is found in those who protect the vulnerable. He knows now that the trail ahead isn't just for them, it's a path they must pave for others who are still lost in the dark. Elias's choice in that candlelit cabin wasn't just about a dog or a soldier's code. It was the moment he realized that his greatest victory wasn't won on a distant battlefield, but in the quiet surrender of his own pride to protect a soul more vulnerable than his own. We often spend the better part of our lives building fortresses of iron and expectation, polishing our armor until it glimmers, and sharpening our skills until we are nothing but sharp edges. We believe our value is measured by our utility, our efficiency, or our strength. But Elias and Bear show us a different, deeper truth. That the most profound courage isn't found in the ability to strike, but in the willingness to be broken for the sake of another. The transition from being an instrument of force to a vessel of grace is the hardest mission any of us will ever face, yet it is the only one that truly leads us home to ourselves. In your life, what are the tactical harnesses you have been wearing? Perhaps it is the heavy weight of a career that has long since hollowed out your spirit, the jagged scars of past grievances you refuse to let heal, or the exhausting belief that you must always be the warrior who carries the weight of the world alone. We are conditioned by society to be assets, to be productive, to be unbreakable, but we are rarely taught the sacred art of simply being. We stare at the red laser dots of our own modern anxieties, the mortgage, the deadlines, the expectations, and the ghosts of who we once were, and we forget that there is a quiet crawlspace of freedom waiting for us, the moment we have the faith to let go. Have you ever reached the point where you were willing to stand in the center of your own storm, empty-handed and exposed, only to find that in your vulnerability you were finally, truly safe? There is a profound, ancient wisdom that suggests the true warrior is not the one who conquers a city, but the one who can turn a weapon into a plowshare, who can find the soft spot behind the ears of a beast that once knew only the sharp command to attack. It is a surrender to grace, that unearned, overwhelming kindness that whispers to us that we are enough, not because of the medals on our chest, but because of the compassion in our hearts. It is the realization that while the world values the strength of the sword, a higher power values the hand that shields. Elias looked at the discarded assets of his life and saw the reflection of a creator who never views a broken soul as scrap metal. He found peace because he dared to believe that even in the freezing rain of our darkest, most isolated nights, we are never truly alone. The mountain air is thin, but it is pure. The scars remain, but the bleeding has finally stopped. A hand on a head, a heavy sigh in the afternoon sun. Two sets of tired eyes, finally seeing the light for what it is. True courage doesn't always roar like a lion on the front lines. Sometimes it is the quiet, rhythmic click-clack of a brass tag against a collar. It is the steady heartbeat of a man and his dog, walking a path they finally paved with nothing but trust. We realize then that courage walks on 2 legs and 4, because in the end, we are never defined by the wars we were forced to fight, but by the love we chose to save at all costs. Every ending is just a new trail waiting to be explored. Stories like Elias and Saber's don't end here. If you want to see what happened next and discover more stories of redemption and faith that might change how you see everything, subscribe.